I had the watch when the debt came due. 22,000 years is a long time to hold a grudge, and longer still to hold a secret. But the Concord of Ash never gave us a choice on either count. My name is Rennick Voss. I have stood post on the Meridian Wall for 11 years, born to a family that had crewed it for 6 generations, and every one of us had been told the same thing as children. The tithe ships would come again one day, and when they did, we were not to look surprised. I did not look surprised. I will say that for myself. My grandmother trained me on this deck when I was 19, standing at the same console I stood at the morning the tithe wing dropped out of the dark. She ran drills that made no sense to me at the time, tracking phantom contacts that never resolved into anything, memorizing a Concord document line by line as though a treaty could be studied the way you study a blade. I asked her once why we bothered rehearsing for a fight everyone said would never come in our lifetimes. She told me the readiness was the point, not the fight, and readiness that waits for a reason to exist isn't readiness at all. It's fear with better posture. I did not understand her fully until the morning I am telling you about now. The Larenth Assembly signed the Concord with a broken planet. Earth had been bled by a war we did not start and could not finish, and when the Assembly's envoys came, they did not offer mercy so much as terms. Tribute in ore, in labor, in every surplus year yields, delivered on schedule for 22,000 years, in exchange for the Assembly leaving us alone to do it. No garrisons, no governors. Just the ledger, and the ships that came every few centuries to audit it. We paid every tithe on time. That was the discipline of it. Not defiance, not sabotage, not some coiled resentment waiting to spring. We paid in full, we underreported nothing they could verify, and we let the auditors walk our fields and our foundries and see exactly what the ledger said they would see. A client world, poor in everything but patience, working itself thin to meet its obligations. What the ledger never said was where the surplus actually went. There is a difference between what a world produces and what a world admits to producing, and the gap between those two numbers, kept honest and quiet for 200 generations, is where the Meridian Wall was built, and the shipyards beneath the southern ice, and the fleet dispersed through belts the Assembly's surveys had marked as barren. None of it broke the Concord's letter. The Concord bound the tribute. It never once claimed to own the rest of us. The tithe wing arrived on the exact day the old treaty clock ran out, which told me they had kept better records than I expected, and worse instincts. 4 capital ships, their hulls scarred in the old Larenth style, dropping into high orbit with the same broadcast our archives said they had used the first time. 22 millennia gone, tribute is due, present your ledger, your world remains at peace so long as the terms are honored. They were not wrong that the terms had been honored. They were wrong about everything else. I watched their lead ship's sensors work through the first hour, and I have thought about that hour more than almost anything else in my life. You could see it happen if you knew what their instruments were built to expect, the slow crawl of confusion, as their scans found the wall sitting exactly where an unarmed relay beacon was supposed to be, as they logged 3 moons in the outer system that their own charts called uninhabited and unmined, as the shipyards under the southern ice, logged for 22,000 years as a geothermal research station, returned a keel count that belonged to no research station anywhere. Their hail slowed, their tone changed. By the second hour they were not broadcasting collection terms anymore. They were asking us to clarify our status, and I could hear, even through the flatness of the translation, that the question was no longer procedure. It was fear, dressed as protocol. I did not answer that hail myself. That decision belonged above my rank, and it was made with the same discipline that had built everything they were now trying to make sense of. No gloating, no message crafted to humiliate them, just silence, and the fleet closing the distance at a pace that told them everything the silence didn't. We did not fire first. It was not mercy so much as method. 22,000 years of not looking ready had taught us the value of not looking eager either. The interdiction ships, took the Tithe Wing's engines apart from range before their crews had finished arguing about what to do with us. And the wall's own batteries, logged for centuries as agricultural weather control, bracketed their capital ship without putting a round through her hull. It was less a battle than a door closing on a hand that had reached in one time too many. Their commander surrendered from a ship with no working drive and full life support, which was exactly the outcome we had built for. He was a tall, pale creature named, as near as I can render it, Vresk, and when they brought him up to the wall under guard, he did not rage the way the old record said his kind was known to. He moved like a man doing arithmetic he did not want to finish. He looked at the observation deck, at Earth turning slow and blue and unbothered below us, and he asked me, through the translator, how long we had been building this. I told him the truth, longer than his assembly had been collecting from us. Every tithe he had ever received had been paid out of the surplus we let him see, and every surplus he never saw had gone into exactly this. He wanted to know why we had never simply told the assembly to leave, if we had the strength for it all along. We did not spend 200 centuries preparing a war we did not need to fight, I told him. We spent them preparing an ending we could survive, without becoming the thing that had bled us in the first place. Patience was not our weakness. It was the only weapon that let us choose, when the day finally came, exactly how much of ourselves we were willing to spend. He asked if it had all been for this one morning. I said no, it had been for every morning after it, the ones where nobody, on either side of that treaty, would ever have to ask that question again. We did not annihilate the Tithe Wing, and we did not let it limp home to warn the rest of the assembly on its own terms either. We held the ships, disarmed the crews, and presented Vresk with the Concord itself, the actual text, not the summary his envoys had carried for 200 centuries, and showed him the clause his own government had written into it and never once expected to need, that a tribute world, once it could demonstrate the capacity to refuse, and chose instead to have paid honestly, held the right to renegotiate the Concord as an equal party. He read it twice. I watched him understand, in the second reading, that we had known that clause existed since before his grandmother's grandmother was born, and had simply waited for the day it would matter. He signed the new terms 3 days later, not because we forced his hand with more than we had already shown him, we did not need to, but because the alternative was explaining to the Assembly's council how 22,000 years of tithe reports had described, in perfect and unbroken honesty, a world that no longer existed. He asked, before he signed, whether we intended to make an example of the Tithe Wing to the rest of the assembly. I told him no crew of his would be harmed, and no ship would be kept longer than it took to strip the weapons they never should have brought. It took him the better part of that third day to understand that we were not being merciful. We were simply finished being afraid of him, and a world that is no longer afraid does not need to prove anything by how it treats the frightened. I still stand my watch on the Meridian Wall. The tithe ships do not come anymore. There is nothing left to collect, and the debt, such as it was, has been repaid in full and then some, not with blood, though we would have spent it, but with the plain fact of what patience builds when nobody is looking. Vresk's ship left under its own power at the end, escorted past the moon we had never bothered to hide, only never bothered to explain. He did not look back at the wall as his ship cleared the perimeter. I have wondered since whether that was pride, or simply the discipline of a defeated man choosing not to let us see his face twice. I think often of the drills my grandmother ran, the ones that made no sense to a 19-year-old who could not imagine a use for them. I think of every child born on this wall since the Concord was signed, raised on the same quiet instruction: hold your post, keep the ledger honest, and do not mistake patience for surrender. None of them, across 200 centuries, ever got to see the morning their work was for. I got to see it, and I have spent every watch since, trying to hold it the way they would have wanted it held, without triumph, without cruelty, with the plain and unhurried knowledge that we had never once needed to be told we were ready. We already knew.